Welcome to Witness Wednesdays here on the Walk Boldly with Jesus podcast. I am your host, Katherine Duggan. However, each Wednesday, I will have a guest give their witness of how God is working in their lives. Hearing how God is working in other people's lives shows us how deeply He cares for each one of us individually. Listening to these experiences will help your faith grow. I am so blessed to be able to share these with you. Let's get started. Today, I would like to witness about how faithful God is and how He is always listening, even when you don't think He is. My husband, Tony, joined ROTC in college and was commissioned in the Air Force right after his 4 years of college was over. Although he was enjoying the Air Force, after his 4-year commitment was up, he started looking for a different job. He had always wanted to be a criminal investigator for a government agency. His top choices were the Marshals or the FBI. He applied to many positions and was often considered for the jobs, but ultimately didn't get hired because veterans had preferential treatment, and although he was in the military, he wasn't a veteran yet because he was still in the military. I talked with him about getting out of the military and finding a job, but we had 3 small boys at the time, and giving up a steady income and great health care in the hopes of finding his dream job was not something he was willing to do. He searched for several years while we were in New Jersey. There wasn't any real urgency to his search, though, because he really liked being in the military and was happy in the various jobs he had on base. Then in 2009, we moved to Stuttgart, Germany. We were excited for the move as we had lived overseas in the country of Turkey a few years earlier and loved it. Tony didn't love Germany. He was not happy at his job, and he was not happy in Germany. We were supposed to be there 3 years, I think, but he was really wanting to go home the whole first year we were there. He was finally settling into Germany and beginning to think it wasn't so bad when October 2010 came around and changed our lives forever. In the summer of 2010, we heard there was going to be a reduction in force for Air Force personnel officers that were Tony's year group. What this means is they had too many personnel officers with the same rank, and they needed to let some of them go. Basically, the Air Force was doing a layoff. Tony's bosses told him not to worry. They usually cut the bottom 10%. They look at your performance reports to see who's not performing as good as the rest of them. I'm sure they take other things into account also. I just don't know what they are. Tony's bosses said he had nothing to worry about because he was always given really high scores on his performance reports. He was always rated number 1 out of however many officers there were that he worked with. One morning in October of 2010, Tony went to work and found out his name had been selected to be laid off. It was devastating news. Everyone was astonished. His bosses called to see if there was some mistake. They said there wasn't. This board was different from previous boards. They let a lot of people go that scored high on their performance reviews, and they kept a lot of people that others thought would surely be let go because they didn't score well at all. Many people said it didn't make sense. They let go some squadron commanders, and in order to have that job, it means you're in the top 10%. It was confusing, and no one understood why they made the decisions they made. And yet, there was nothing we could do about it. There was no appeals process. None of us could understand what happened, and yet, God knew. We were now living in Germany. We had 4 months to find a new job and to move. Tony had to find a job while living in Germany, which meant he had to fly back to the States for interviews or take them over the phone. This was a very difficult time for Tony. The uncertainty of the future and how he was going to provide for the family was weighing heavily on him. We did pray together that God would provide and find him a job. We knew God would take care of us, and yet there was still that worry, especially as it got closer and closer to the deadline of us having to move. However, even in that, we could see God working. For instance, because it was the military saying we had to move, they were going to pay for our move. We didn't have to worry about how we were going to afford to move back to the States. I believe they also let you keep the medical care for 6 months after you got out of the military until you found another job. So we weren't going to be left out in the cold. Although after giving the military 11 years of your life and then being let go, I am sure to Tony it probably felt like they were abandoning him. Tony started applying for jobs right away. In December, he went back to the U.S. for a transitions class that helps people who are transitioning from the military back to civilian life. While he was back in the States, he got a job interview for a job at Lakenheath, England. The job was to be the Mission Support Group Deputy Commander. He said he felt like he had a pretty good interview. He really liked the commander who was interviewing him, and it sounded like the job would be something he would really enjoy. He was unsure if he would get the job, though, because the other person they were interviewing had a lot more experience than he did. The other person was a retired colonel, so he had over 20 years' experience. Right before Tony got on the plane to come back to Germany, he found out they were offering him the job. He was so excited. Although Tony was excited for the job, we really had no idea how much of an answer to our prayers it was until we got there and he started working. Tony had wanted to get out of the military for a few years now, but especially that last year and a half. However, he wouldn't just leave the military without having another job because he wanted to be a good provider for our family. All of a sudden, there was a situation where he had to leave the military. That part of the story is not great. I know Tony hates the way he left the military, and yet it forced him to take the step he had been wanting to take. He absolutely loved the job he went to. It was a promotion also. He was a major in the Air Force, and he was a GS-14 in the civilian world, which is equivalent to a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. In this job, he wasn't in the military, but everyone he worked with was, so he got to have the best of both worlds. His job as Deputy Mission Support Group Commander meant that he got to oversee the workings of the support side of the base. Anything that had to do with services for the people that worked on base. For instance, the security forces and the fire department, the hotel on base and all the restaurants, the civil engineers and the housing offices. Tony got to work with all these different squadrons. This job was exactly what Tony was looking for, even if he didn't know it when he first got it. Tony was so grateful to have a job and to get to stay overseas in England. Although Tony wasn't happy with why he had to find this job, he was so happy in this job. He really enjoyed working with the commander that hired him into the position, even though she was just there for a few months before she moved. Then he had 2 great commanders after her before we moved back to the United States. We stayed in England for about 4.5 years, and Tony loved his job. It was more than he could have ever asked for. He loved helping people. He loved being around the military, and he loved those he worked with. He could not have asked for a better outcome or a better job. We also found an amazing house when we moved there. The boys each had amazing friends, and we were blessed with family friends who had children our boys' age. We were able to go on family vacations with them and have them come over to our house. It was an incredible 4.5 years. As I said at the beginning, this is a witness as to how faithful God is and how he is listening even when you don't know that he is. Tony talked about getting a job outside the military, but I don't know if he ever talked to God about it specifically. Tony wanted to get out of the military, but he didn't want to jump ship without another job. God heard that and took care of it. I also want to point out how God always outdoes our expectations. Tony was looking for any job. He probably would have taken any job, even if it wasn't that perfect, because we needed an income and we needed health insurance. Yet God found him the perfect job. It wasn't just another job. It was a job and a promotion. It was a job helping people, which always fills Tony's heart and soul. He found us the perfect friends and made sure each of the 3 boys had a best friend as well. He found us the perfect house that was big enough for us to have our friends over. He put the perfect bosses in Tony's path, so Tony had awesome leadership to help him learn this new position. God goes above and beyond. It won't always look like you want it to. It won't always happen in the way we want it to. There will be times of uncertainty when we have to step out in faith and keep trusting, even when we don't see the ending. This was a period of extreme uncertainty, and yet we can see God's hand in all of it. If you are in an uncertain period right now, just keep holding on. Just keep trusting. God is working on a plan that is going to knock your socks off. I know it's hard when you're waiting, and I know it's frustrating because it's God's time, not ours. But your answer is coming. I promise. We have all seen God working in our lives. However, we might not all be aware it is God working in our lives. This is why it's so important we start talking about it more. The more we share our experience, the more people will understand how God works and how much He truly loves us. If you would be willing to share any experience you've had of how God has worked or is working in your life, please email me at Catherine@findingtruenorthcoaching.com. And that's CATHERINE at findingtruenorthcoaching.com. Or just click on the link below. It won't take up much of your time, and your story could be just the story that someone needs to hear today. Prayerfully consider sharing. Everyone has a story, and the world needs to hear them. I look forward to spending time with you again tomorrow, and I will have another witness for you next Wednesday. Have a blessed day.